Len, thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Mark. Thank you.
So to really kick off our time together, I want to just reiterate what Ripple Effect is about, what it's intended to do, and it'll be a good segue into you and I sitting down here today. But Ripple Effect is really about having conversations with individuals and organizations that are doing positive change inside the community, their neighborhoods, their communities, and culturally as a whole to really elevate everyone around them. I'm passionate about that. And the older I get, I just see the importance of that every single day, just get solidified and codified more and more every single day. And so getting a chance to sit down with you, knowing your history, what you've done, where you're at today with Arizona Christian University, this is just a great conversation to have. I'm excited to hear more about what you've done, give the audience a good understanding of where you've been, but also where you're going into the future. So with
Very
all
good.
of that, today you're the president of Arizona Christian University, but you have a tenured career leading up to today. Can you kind of give us a high level, however you want to, how deep you want to go or how you want to keep it?
Well, first of all, I love the concept. That's a great name and a great concept of the ripple effect, because I think a lot of times what we do in ministry, it's hard to gauge, what the effect is at the moment. But when you think about, when you see it over time, and you talked about as we get older, it's hard for me to believe I'm as old as I am. I was always the young guy at everything I did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a strange place to be able to look back over 4 decades of work in the state of Arizona, on behalf of really the kingdom of God and families and the sanctity of life and the concept of flourishing. And so, for me, it sort of started in college. I was a journalist at Arizona State University, and I recommitted my life to Christ in that season and started reading the Bible every day. And in me, a passion began to develop to find ways to advance the kingdom, not just because there's a God who created us and loves us and wants us to live great lives, but because you realize that when you pursue the things of God and when you promote a culture that recognizes who God is and how He designed us to live, that's how you generate human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it is that people have lives that are joyful and blessed. And when you do that on an individual level, and then it expands out in concentric circles, the ripple effect concept, it changes culture, and it makes the world a better place for everyone to live in. And so for me, it came back to when I really, at that time frame as a young journalist, reading where Jesus says, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," and starting to think about, well, what does that look like if we actually take that seriously and say, okay, how can we do as much as we can, flawed though we are, sinful though we are, to bring about the kingdom of God here on earth even before we get to heaven? What would that look like? What kind of laws would there be? That was I went to law school after college, and really I went to law school because I wanted to affect the issue that you're involved in. I wanted to protect human life from the moment of conception, and didn't understand how we had gotten to a place in our country where life was disposable. So I thought, well, the law is the way to effectuate change. But I guess over the course of my career, I've shifted to a much broader perspective of what the culture is and what we can do to make a difference. So for me, it started with, the first big controversy I got into was I was the editor of the newspaper at Arizona State University, and I wrote a column from a biblical perspective, but full of grace, about the issue of homosexuality. That was 1984.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 20. And before I knew it, I had several hundred protesters out front with signs with my name on them and chanting not so nice things. And I did my first television interviews when I was 20 as this editor who'd written a column encouraging people to walk away from homosexual conduct. And it was sort of a sort of a rude awakening to where things were in the culture. And of course, that was long ago.
Yeah.
It's become, it's moved much more away from God's perspective on issues since then. So I went right into law school, got involved in a lot of different conservative activities, founded the Federalist Society, which is kind of like the conservative
Yeah.
legal group at Arizona State. And then when I graduated, I founded the Phoenix Lawyers Division of that. But I immediately went to work for a guy named Alan Sears in the fight against pornography. This was back in the late 1980s. President Reagan had appointed a commission to study the effect of pornography, and it was the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. Edwin Meese was the Attorney General at the time, and so I got involved. Alan had been the executive director of that. I got involved with a nonprofit law firm that was basically working with communities to protect communities from the impact of sexually oriented businesses, the issue of, you hear a lot about today about human trafficking and sex trafficking. That's really what was going on. I think they do a better job of marketing how to oppose it today. I think but I mean, the reality is it's very destructive. It was destructive then. It's destructive more so now in our culture. But so I jumped right into that world of sort of conservative Christian nonprofit work. And then in 1996, founded the Center for Arizona Policy, which was Arizona's pro-life, pro-family organization on the policy level. And so, throughout that time, my passion, I think, and this developed undergrad and the beginning of law school, was to see another great awakening in our country. I sort of recognized early on that we have this biblical foundation as a nation. Even though we've always made mistakes, and that's a given, but there was a biblical foundation in the principles that we upheld, and that we have constantly striven to live out those biblical principles, and that we'd kind of forgotten who we were as a people, walked away from that biblical foundation, and I wanted to be a part of. I wanted to use my life to be a part of calling our nation back to our biblical foundations, and so that's sort of animated everything that I've done, but with the concept that, I want to be a part of the next great awakening. And I think I will be. I hope God tarries long enough, but that's the goal. And so at every step along the way in different areas, that's what I've been motivated by.
Okay. Going all the way back to 1989, the shot across the bow in your article that you wrote, right? That was kind of the...
Yeah, well, it was actually 1984.
84, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is really, that's a whole separate conversation, but just interesting, the vitriol you got in 1984 for that particular topic and where we see that level today. That's interesting.
Well, it is. And, that's not ever an issue that I would have chosen to be engaged on, but it was sort of the beginning of what was called the gay rights movement. And, even it's hard for me to contemplate how rapidly culture has shifted on that. There was all this angst on the left when Roe v. Wade was overturned, by Dobbs after 50 plus years. And yet I'm thinking back, as a lawyer, the Supreme Court upheld the idea of criminalizing homosexual conduct in 1986 and overruled it in 2003. So in 17 years, it went from, this is actually a crime that you can be prosecuted for, to this is a civil right that you not only can't oppose, but even if you speak out against it, you're going to be pilloried and canceled.
Yep.
So that was within 2 decades. So I watched all that happen, and it's sort of stunning. But it's an example of how we've continued to retreat from what God says is true.
Yeah, the pace on a number of those types of issues has just been stunning to watch. Yeah. I think you've pretty much already answered this question, but I'll put a fine point on it. What led you to leave that world that you were in and go into Christian education, where you're at today?
Well, I lost an election, so that's one factor. I would say this was God's plan, not mine. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is to play your position. Whatever God calls you to do, you do it. And so I had been in the policy world my entire career, into my early 40s. And at Center for Arizona Policy, we'd had a tremendous amount of success advancing legislation. But between 2003 and 2006, we had a governor that vetoed virtually everything that we did. We found a few things that we could get her support on, but certainly not anything in the life area. And so I felt called to jump into that arena. And when you talk about electoral politics, what do you learn from that experience? One of the things I learned is that timing is everything. So you don't want to run in the only election in American history where Republican parties candidates don't defeat any Democratic incumbents. Not for governor, not for Senate, not for Congress. Not a single Republican unseated a Democrat incumbent. There's only one election. That was the year that I ran. So really, really bad timing, but phenomenal experience. And I guess, as I made the move into education, it was more of a sense that you're moving from kind of the front lines of these battles in our culture to the supply lines. That we need more young men and women who are motivated, inspired to go out and be difference makers for the kingdom of God.
100% agree.
Yeah.
You mentioned that race that you were part of. Timing is everything.
Yeah.
Were there any key takeaways from that entire experience which had to have been daunting? I know it's like living under a magnifying glass at the same time as well, but is there anything from that you still carry with you today?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the great things about being a candidate for office is you get an opportunity to see things from a completely different perspective. When you travel for most of a year around, and I'm a native Arizonan, love the state of Arizona. One of the things that I said at that time to people that were listening is that, Governor Napolitano came here to have a political career. And when it's no longer expedient, she won't be in Arizona anymore. And of course, she was appointed Homeland Security Secretary, and then she's been in California ever since. But I said, I'll be here long after she's gone. And I guess one of the things that I recognize is at that point, I'd spent most of my career thinking biblically about a handful of issues that I was dealing with on the policy front. And when you run for governor, you start to understand the scope of issues that people are dealing with. You basically spend most of a year going around talking to people, asking questions, learning in all the different parts of our great state, what are the things that people are concerned about. So I think for me, it gave me a much broader perspective. I think it's incredibly valuable for anybody to run for office, to just have the opportunity to interact with so many different people with so many different backgrounds, and all over the state of Arizona. I'd traveled to Arizona a lot as a native Arizonan, but not as much as I did that year. I got to see all parts of the state and made me love the state even more and really get a feel for what are the things that people are thinking about as they go through their daily life, and how do they view the government? What are the things that they think they can be helped by, and what are the things more often that they just prefer the government would leave them alone?
Yeah.
I actually think that's a more of a biblical perspective. Yeah. Biblically, the role of government is very limited, and that's of course the concept that we had in our country at the founding, that we have drifted from quite significantly.
Yeah. Just a little bit out of scope at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So transitioning to Arizona Christian University, for those listening in that have no idea who that is, what that is, can you give us a quick high level?
Yeah, so Arizona Christian University was founded in 1960 as Southwestern Conservative Baptist Bible College. And it was a denominational school for most of its first half century. Although before I became president, it had moved out of being a denominational school and became non-denominational. So mutually with the denomination. So it had a really strong tradition and foundation of commitment to biblical truth. And that's the piece that I was committed to, the thing that I cared about. I'd started actually teaching there in the 1990s as an adjunct professor, teaching a class in Christian ethics. And as I got to know the students, a very small student population. I think when I was teaching there were 150 or 160 students. At one point, I had 40 of them in my class, so I got a pretty good sense of the type of student who was drawn there. Largely people that wanted to go into ministry or missions, sometimes worship ministry. Education program got added in the 1980s, and then a business program in the 1990s. But fairly limited degree options, but a real strong foundation in Bible. And so in 2010, I'd taught there off and on for 15 years. I'd been serving on the board of trustees. And there was a significant question about, as we're seeing is happening all over the place right now with small colleges, is this even viable? Grand Canyon University, with a much broader appeal, had attracted a lot of students. They became for-profit, had a lot of investor money poured into it. And suddenly the question that we were looking at as board members is this university going to survive? Does it have a reason to? At that point, there were between 300 and 400 students. So in the midst of that, I was asked to step in as interim president. And I literally thought, I don't want to do it for just a few months until the next president gets here, because no one's going to listen to the things that I think we need to do to make this place viable and the changes that I think we need to make. But I didn't want to do it for life. For me, I felt like this is a temporary detour from my involvement in the policy world. And so I made a 2-year commitment to be the interim president. And that was 15 years ago. So it didn't go the way that I planned. But as I said, play your position.
Right.
God called me into this. He hasn't called me out of it yet. And there's lots to do. It was a bigger project to take a small Bible college that was struggling to survive, and move it to a place of strength and growth and vitality, missionally. It's an industry, as I tell people, there are constant headwinds against higher ed, more so now than even when I started. But the year that I started was the peak of college enrollment in America. So since 2010, there are 15% fewer students going to college today than there were in 2010. And so, that's a headwind that every college is dealing with.
And that's nationwide.
It's nationwide.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we've sort of defied gravity on that front, and we've been able to grow in the midst of it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the clarity of our mission, what it is that we're trying to accomplish at ACU, which I think sets us apart even from other Christian colleges.
Well, that was my next question for you. What is it that makes ACU different? What distinguishes it from the others?
Couple of things. We are one of only about 1 in 3, maybe it's closer to 1 in 4 now, of Christian colleges that is what we call covenantal. And that means that our students, in order to be admitted, have to have a profession of faith in Christ. And if you look at I always have to have this caveat, because if you look at our core commitments, evangelism, be devoted to evangelism, is one of the core commitments of the university. But we do evangelism externally, and a lot of times we do it through our athletics, recruiting events. We do it through other events that are external to the university. But as people come into contact with ACU because they're interested in coming there, we have a very gifted evangelist on staff, and he shares the gospel. So we've seen more than 400 decisions for Christ on our campus each of the last 3 years, which I dare to say is probably more than most churches will see in a year. So we are committed to evangelism, but the mission of the school is to educate Christians. It's to take people that say, yes, I'm a follower of Christ, I want to grow in my faith, and I want my life to count for the kingdom of God. I want to do something significant for the kingdom. that's what missionally, that's what we're set up to do. So number one, we're covenantal. Number two, we do take the perspective with young men and women from the moment they arrive that that your life has meaning, and that as a follower of Christ, you're in full-time ministry, even if you're going into business, if you're going into politics, if you're going into education, if you're going into the media and the arts. When you're a follower of Christ, you're in full-time ministry. That's just who you are. And we're not called to be sort of passive bystanders in life. God calls us to be salt and light. In other words, we should influence what happens around us. So what we're trying to do at ACU that I think really makes us unique is that we're taking kids who've said, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus. And we actually, you'd be surprised the lengths to which we go to ascertain, whether that's legitimate or not. Now, there are always going to be some kids who fool us, or who, in some cases, we've seen some kids really catch fire who thought they had an understanding of who Christ was, and then they got into our community and realized, whatever was in my head is not translated to my heart, and so they come to faith. And so we see that, and we see a lot of baptisms of kids that are followers of Christ, but who really hit a new level of their commitment to the Lord, surrounded as they are at ACU with a Christian community that is trying to disciple them in all things that we do. But I think the biggest factor is that there's this thing called the 7 mountains of cultural influence, and we have embraced that. We're the only Christian university that has said that all these areas of cultural influence need to have Christians in them. As the scripture says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan. Yeah. The reality is that people, whether they know Christ or not, are better served in a community where businessmen are honest and keep their word and don't break contracts, where people that are in government are there to serve people as opposed to be served by them. Those are basic biblical principles that at one point were at the center of our culture. And there's a pastor, and it's actually a great guy and a friend, but he'd like to talk about how we just need to understand that in our culture, we used to be the home team and everybody was rooting for us as Christians in America. And now we're the road team, and the refs are against us and the crowd's booing. And we just have to get used to that at some level, but that's where we are. I think he's right about where we are, but I want my grandchildren to grow up where we're the home team again, because the culture will be better if Christ is at the center of culture. And so that's what we're trying to bring about at Arizona Christian University as we continue to grow, is to send men and women out, not just as pastors and missionaries and worship leaders, and we do produce graduates who are called into full-time vocational ministry, but also people that have a concept of being in full-time ministry, even as they lead businesses and nonprofits, and even as they teach in the public schools, even as they go serve in government in some way.
Absolutely.
So that is so we're specifically. And I should, for the theologians out there, I want to be sure to distinguish. This is not the concept of Christians taking over everything and then Jesus can come back. This is simply the concept of being salt and light and of influencing people around you to draw them back to the truth of the gospel and to put Christ back at the center of culture. And so that's what we're doing at ACU. It's a very specific mission, and I think it's one of the reasons that we're growing so rapidly. We see these amazing stories of transformation, but we also have incredible opportunity to see kids that came in with a strong faith just accelerate to different levels because of the way that we do things at ACU.
Which is antithetical to what they're going to get at other universities with that experience. And
yeah, I've been saying for a while now that most universities in this country, sadly, are indoctrinating young men and women to hate God, hate America, hate their parents in some cases, and yet we keep sending kids into these places that are going to really be destructive for their soul. And in some cases, young men and women are able to stand out and shine and really have influence. But not everyone is wired that way.
Right.
And, the concept, the biblical concept that if you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas, there's going to be, at some level, when you surround yourself with people that are attacking the foundational things that you believe in, it's going to have an effect.
Absolutely.
It's going to change. It's going to really limit your ability to grow as a follower of Christ.
Yeah. And these students are at different levels of maturity as well.
They are.
Personal maturity, spiritual maturity.
Yep.
We work through our church with high school students on a routine basis. And actually, a couple of them are actually they're starting ACU this next year, which is really exciting.
Wonderful.
But there's a spectrum of spiritual maturity for all of us. And sometimes they're just not ready to go into that type of hostile environment. It's just a reality.
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier that I love and resonates with me, is that it's the specificity of the mission of the organization that I think, to your point, resonates so much. But regardless of what it is you're doing, what industry, what vertical, that mission is paramount, because that is your true north. That is your benchmark for how you make decisions.
Yep.
It's how you treat people. It's how you define success, which is a crucial element that I think is missing in a lot of areas. But even the two students in particular that I know are going, that's what stands out to them. Like that's what's unique about ACU, and that's why they want to go there. As far as the legacy, I know I'm jumping ahead here, but what do you hope will be the ripple effect of ACU whenever God says, "Hey, Len, you're done here"?
Well, that's one of the things that is really fascinating to think about, because look, when I started at ACU, we were on the old campus, and we haven't gotten to that yet to talk about how we made it out to Glendale and the miracle that God did there. But it was a battle to survive every year. And there were many, many times when I thought, there's no way that we can make it. Now, I could never convey that to the community. Yeah, as a leader, you have to be confident.
Mm-hmm.
And I was confident in the Lord, but in the eyes of the world and just in the balance sheet and looking at the reality, it was like, there is no way.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Been there a few times.
Yeah. And I lived there for a number of years, and it's incredibly stressful when you're trying to figure out how to make it through and keep everybody's confidence up in the Lord. But because we did that, because we had board members and donors and leaders of the school who did not give up when it would have been very easy to give up, I know there are not only, thousands of people, as I've just described, even in the last few years, who've come to faith in Christ because ACU exists, because of the evangelistic work we do. There are thousands more whose lives have been transformed as they've grown in their faith. I know for a fact that because we didn't quit and give up, there are marriages that have occurred and children who have been born. That's, to me, that's overwhelming. Like those are the kind of things that I think you can know in an abstract way. I think someday we'll get to see face to face the effect of the things that we do, but we don't always see it in this world. So you can know that this is happening, but the actual reality, all the time I hear stories of what God did through ACU in some way. Stories that I have nothing to do with other than my role in making sure that the university didn't fail.
Absolutely.
Through those really hard days. And it's exciting for me because I know for every one that I do hear about, there's hundreds that I never hear about of ways that God worked, ways that God moved. And I have seen so many miracles of God, miracles of provision, provision of people, provision of resources, that I know God is in it. And even in the midst of all the challenging days, I was able to say, okay, God was in it to this point, and I had a pastor on the board who's a dear friend, and one of the really good moments for me with him at a point when I wasn't sure we were even going to get through the next month, and I was expressing all of this stress and anxiety and all the things that I felt like I needed to do to make sure that the school could survive. And he looked at me and he said, "Len, it's not up to you." And of course, I had said that many times.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's not up to me, but we say it sometimes better than we live it.
100%.
And so,
Yeah.
Just the reminder that it's God's place,
Yep.
and if it lives or dies, it's really His call. All we can do is be faithful and
Yep.
do everything that. And I just tell you that, there's nothing quite like getting to the end of yourself and your own abilities. When I came to the school, I brought a big network of relationships, contacts, supporters, and I brought it to the school, and I said, "Here," and I began to, tap into that network. I began to use you talk about strategy, having, if you go to Strength Finders, my top two are strategic and belief. So I've got to believe in it, or I can't convince anybody else to get behind it. But strategic. And so clarifying our core commitments, our mission, being unafraid to describe ourselves as conservative, theologically and culturally conservative as an institution. So as I began to come in and make these changes, I brought everything I had to the university. And when you get to the place where you realize I've done everything I know how to do with the gifts God's given me, I've talked to everybody that I can talk to about this place, and it's still not going to make it unless you, God, intervene.
Yeah.
And I lived in that place for several years of just, waking up in the middle of the night and going into my study and literally getting on the floor on my face before God and saying, "I've tried everything I know how to do. If you don't step in this place, and all these people with jobs and all these students are going to be are going to have to start over." So it was freeing to have a pastor say, "It's not up to you." Yeah. But I experienced that. I lived that. Yeah. So I know that ACU is there today, influencing thousands of lives, bigger than ever, in a stronger position than ever, not because of me and my abilities, but because God wanted it to be there doing what it's doing.
We could just deep dive what you just said for the next hour, because so much of it's resonating with my own personal experiences. But I had a pastor at the nonprofit that I work for, and we would have these sessions where we would just sit down and just talk. And we were in a rough spot financially, and he said, "Here's the best thing I've ever been told about ministry." He said, "The best way to hold on to ministry is with both hands wide open." He said, "Because ultimately you don't have any control. To your point, you need to show up, give 100%, be a good steward of what God's given to you. But to your point, and what I tell the team at my nonprofit all the time is, listen, if God wants this place to be open for another 42 years, nothing's going to stop it. Mm-hmm. If he wants it to close tomorrow, it's going to close tomorrow."
Yeah.
And my own personal leadership journey at my organization, it was no sleep, blood pressure medication. It was, I'm going to pray, and I know God's going to bring it, and then I would stop praying and then go worry for the next 24 hours. And I've told that to my team. It's a very natural human response. I'm not proud of it, but it's the reality of it. But I think it's a healthy exercise, and I think it's an important thing to convey for individuals that are listening or watching this. It's antithetical to what we see in Silicon Valley leadership and what is promoted as executive leadership today, where it's all about me, and if I'm not here, everything's going to fail. It's antithetical to that when you're in ministry. If it's about you and only you, you're setting yourself up for absolute failure and disaster. Yeah. You have to bring what you've got to the table, but you've got to rely solely on God. And it sounds like your process or your situation was somewhat similar. Mine was very much God going, we're gonna shed away all this ego and what you think you're going to do and refine you to where I want you
humbling.
to be.
It's incredibly humbling.
Incredibly humbling. Yeah. And then it's once he's got you to where he wants you, then it's okay, now we're gonna go here. But you never arrive.
No.
You're constantly going through the valleys.
You're constantly going, and it's the Christian walk. It's the journey that we're all on. There's a reason why it keeps saying over and over again in Scripture, "Don't be afraid and don't be anxious,"
Yep.
because that's the human condition,
Yep.
and that even as a follower of Christ, that's the human condition.
Yep.
And so you have to get out of your flesh and into the Spirit in order to live beyond that. I was going to say too, one of the things that was motivating to me was actually one of our faculty members. I remember at a meeting where we were kind of talking through where we were at fairly early on. And she said, I want to adopt the mindset that every day matters. And I thought, that's a great way to look
Mm-hmm.
at it. Every day that we're here interacting with these students matters.
Yep.
And if it ends tomorrow, today matters.
Yep.
So do it right, do it well. Understand your role as somebody who has a chance to be involved in discipling young men and women, and make it count. And in my role, I'm not as directly involved as often. I get to meet a lot of the students and engage with some of them, but I'm not as directly involved in the students. I don't always see the
Yep.
fruit that's happening, but it was really powerful for me to hear that from a faculty member and to recognize, that every day matters that we're here. I felt like in those years too, it was, we were praying for God to provide, repeatedly protection and provision. That's my constant. When people say, "How can I pray for ACU?" Protection from the schemes of the enemy and provision for
Yep.
us to be able to do what we do. And for the longest time, it felt like every lesson I got was about the manna. Every lesson was about, and it was almost like when I would be reading, and it was almost like I could feel God saying to me, I'd be like, "But with next week, but what about next month? I'm not sure." And he would say, "Do you have enough to do your job today?
Absolutely.
Can you do your job today?" Well, yeah. But what about next week when this hits and when that happens and when we face this challenge? And so I'm thankful that we're out of the manna days, today, but it's not, it's still not easy. There's still challenges, certainly for higher education. But ultimately, I see that we are where we are today because God is a miracle working God, and we've tried to be faithful. And we've seen the situation where we moved campuses in 2019. I've had a number of people in higher education around the country, not just in Christian higher ed, but in secular higher ed, say it is the most remarkable, miraculous story that they've ever heard happening for a small college. And part of what I realized when I'd been at like I said, we came in and we changed the name and we clarified the mission and began to grow on our original campus on Cactus Road.
Yep.
And what I had always been told as a board member, and I just took it at face value, was, well, we just need to get to 500 students or 600 students, and then all of the financial pieces will work themselves out. And so within a couple of years, we were at 500 students, and we were growing and everything. And what I realized is that I had to actually raise more money to make up for a larger gap in operational income. The higher ed business model is very, very challenging. It doesn't, you can't, if you charged what it actually costs to educate kids at this level, no one would pay it. And so you have to fill the gap somehow. And it's primarily through fundraising. And so I learned early on that I didn't know, as a board member, I didn't really understand the business side of the university. I didn't really understand it until I'd been at it for a few years. It started to make more sense to me. And I realized that on that campus, at that size, we could never get to a point of viability, absent somebody, swooping out of the blue and giving us $100 million to put in an endowment. So we always had, interest, positive interest going forward. And that didn't seem to be happening. So, we raised a lot of money, but not that kind of money. And so I began fairly early on looking for a larger footprint, a place where we could get to a size that was sustainable, which is frankly where we are today. We're at a size as a university that is sustainable in the long term. We could never get to that size on that 20-acre campus in Phoenix. And so I'd been looking. We had some false starts. I kept trying to buy things in the neighborhood and being thwarted and being frustrated and saying, why can't we get this that I thought we were going to get and expand on that 20 acres. And then in 2018, Arizona State University had taken over the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Glendale and had decided to shut it down and move the Thunderbird School downtown. And I'd gotten to know President Crow, both from running for governor and then subsequently as a college president, and actually got him to their basketball team to play us a couple of times and give us some visibility, which was great. So I knew President Crow, so I sent him an email and said, "Listen, here's where we're at. We're out of parking. We're out of classroom space." Where we're at, and it's going to be a struggle to survive every year on a campus of this size. It's hard to recruit kids to a 20-acre campus that has 3 or 4 old buildings on it. And I said, "What are you planning to do with the Thunderbird School?" And I'd never even actually been on the campus at that point. I just knew it existed. I didn't understand how beautiful it was. I didn't know that it had a well, so that we could keep it green and have grass and everything. He got back to me that night and said, "We have some preliminary ideas, but nothing has been committed to, and all things are possible." And I remember thinking, well, he just quoted Jesus, so maybe there's something here. And so that started a process of 11 months of secret negotiations. I'd be doing my day job, and every Wednesday afternoon I'd go to Tempe and I'd sit in a room with and I usually had 1 or 2 people with me, but there were like 10 ASU people. They've got, their lawyer, outside lawyer, inside lawyer. They've got the head of their real estate division. They've got their provost. They've got their facilities person. But it was an 11-month process of negotiating a swap of campuses that enabled us to move from 20 acres to 68 acres. Now we're at 75 because subsequent to that, we bought the former Glendale Peoria YMCA, which is the Firestorm Rec Center. So now we have 75 acres. But this swap, it was just a deed swap. So they basically traded us the Thunderbird School for the 20 acres. They were going to redevelop whichever site they kept. And so they were able to do the appraisals as if they were vacant. Both properties were vacant. And the 68 acres was worth more than the 20 acres, but it was close enough that they just said, yep, let's just swap them. But of course, for us, it wasn't vacant. It had 500,000 square feet of academic buildings and beautiful classrooms and 3.5 times the residence hall space and 3.5 times the parking. And it took the restrictions off. I remember people that had been associated with the college for a long time coming to the new campus, and they said, it's like when Pinocchio became a real boy. It's like now we're a real university. Right. We're not a clump of a few buildings on a tiny footprint, a 35,000 square foot library. And of course, we've doubled in size since we moved there just 6 years ago.
That's fantastic.
So, but it was a total miracle how it all came about. There's a lot more to that story, but all that to say, I discovered some of the relationships that were critical to having that be successful were relationships that I had built over 30 years. So in other words, God 30 years ago had me get to know people that would become essential to us completing that land swap in 2019. No way I could have done that. This is like one of those, okay, it just so happens that this person in this key position is a former roommate of mine 30 years ago. Only God could do that. Right. He could see so far into the future that he's planning out, okay, at some point down the road, this guy that thinks he's going to be in the politics and policy world his whole life is going to be running this university, and their lifeline is going to be the chance to move to this incredible new campus. So I got to make sure that these guys meet each other now. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that just when you look at, you know, how amazing God is.
Yeah. I call it just the grand architecture of it all. We see it
Yes.
all the time, broad scale, microcosm, all of it. It's everywhere. I want to transition to you personally on the leadership side. And good leadership, regardless of the organization, is critical. And not that any of us in leadership are perfect or are ever going to be perfect. It's a continual road to improvement and refinement. But there's a lot of bad leadership out there today. And good leadership, everything starts from the top down. Your vision for the organization, obviously the provision and direction that God's given you. But from a very practical standpoint, for you and how you lead, what are and how would you describe either your core leadership principles or values, or however you want to articulate that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to look at that. I feel like in every organization I've led, strategy and vision are critical.
Mm.
You have to have clarity of vision. Why are we here? What are we trying to do and why? And I feel like it's my job to communicate that vision to everybody in the organization as often as I have opportunity to do so. I have a quote on my desk that a lot of people have said, but Reagan was famous for saying, "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit." And the reality of when you're the CEO, when you're the leader of an organization, you get a lot of the credit, sometimes deserved, sometimes undeserved, and you get a lot of the blame, sometimes deserved, sometimes not deserved. But the mindset that, and that's why I've tried to keep at the foremost. I know God's given me different skills and abilities, and I also have many areas of weakness, but I understand that our success is ultimately in God's hands. Our job is to be faithful. I love John Quincy Adams saying, "Duty is ours, results are God's."
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how I view things from a leadership standpoint. It's my job to make sure that we stay on task with our mission and vision, and I know one of the things that I had noted, you talked about what are the ways that we do that at ACU, and so there's a lot of them. One of them is we recruited George Barna, the biblical worldview expert, and biblical worldview is simply discipleship.
Yeah.
It's about Jesus said, "Go therefore and make disciples." We're doing a really bad job of that in America and in the church. Otherwise, we would not have declined as much as we have to where 4% of Americans have a biblical worldview. Well, I asked George to come in and test our students before they ever set foot on campus, at the end of every year, and when they graduate. And we're seeing amazing transformation. But the reason is that we're very focused on being America's premier biblical worldview university. We understand it is our job to make disciples. So every one of our coaches understands that their job is to make disciples. Every one of our faculty members understands that their job is to make disciples. Everybody that works on staff, what are the ways that you stay online with your mission? You make sure that everybody you hire agrees with and signs not only our statement of faith, but our core commitments.
Yeah.
And so and we hire people for security guard positions and for, administrative positions. And we ask them, okay, if a student comes to you and asks this, what are you going to say? We want to make sure that everybody that works at ACU is able to pour biblical truth into our students with love and with grace. And so, one of my questions is, okay, you set this up, and a lot of Christian colleges say that they're doing that, but how do they know?
Right.
Well, we know because we've got the leading expert in the world measuring our students. And so again, I actually interview all of our full-time faculty members because I want to probe them on those areas of cultural confusion right now,
Yeah.
and make sure that they're in complete alignment with ACU's biblical commitments. And we do that with everybody that comes to work. One of the things that we do, and we have faculty that have been with us for 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, but none of them are on long-term contracts, and we have no tenure. And the reason we have no tenure is because that's one of the ways that schools can drift from their mission.
Absolutely.
Is that if people's views evolve over time and they evolve away from a commitment to biblical truth, they won't be a part of ACU, but they might be some other institution where they would have tenure. So everybody, our board of trustees, everybody signs these documents every year. And if they start to deviate from them, if somebody goes, it's funny because on the very rare occasions where we've had maybe an adjunct faculty member start spouting things that are in conflict with our conservative core commitments or biblical truth, that's literally like their last day in the classroom, because we find out about it, usually from students that say, hey, this was going on. But what we want to do, and what we largely have done, is attract people who are motivated by the fact that we're willing to stand for biblical truth.
Absolutely.
And that we're not intimidated by the culture. In fact, one of the things you'll see on signs around campus is courageously Christian.
Yep.
The concept that to be a follower of Christ requires courage today. So as a leader, I feel like my main task is to make sure that we stay missionally aligned, that we're doing what we say that we're going to do. And we're the only university to this point that actually measures it and can document the growth of our students. Every year they're at ACU, their faith grows stronger. If they stay through 4 years, we are graduating students who are significantly more mature biblically, have a much stronger biblical worldview than the typical born-again Christian backbone of the church in America. Mm. Our graduates at 22 or 23 are going to come into the church and seed the church with young men and women who are committed to a biblical worldview, to thinking and living like Jesus.
Yeah, and that's part of that ripple effect that we talk about, which
Absolutely.
is so powerful. What is your advice to not just graduates that are leaving, but individuals that have a biblical worldview? They want to go out into the workforce, they want to go into corporate America, you name it. What's your advice to them based on your 40 plus years of real life experience?
If you are pursuing Christ in your own life, He will guide you vocationally. One of the things that we like to talk about is, what happens with our students. So we have the big numbers, we have the data that shows what happens to our students, but individual cases of transformation that occur at ACU are remarkable. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you know Josiah Friedman, who's one of our graduates with Voices for the Voiceless. And he's a guy that came to ACU thinking he was going to do kind of what I did, do policy-oriented as it relates to abortion and the sanctity of life. And in his time there, growing with the Lord, being on campus, he transformed his thinking into how do we affect cultural change to make the sanctity of life more acceptable in our culture and more mainstream than it is today. So doing really unique things. But I mean, it's hard. Every circumstance is unique, but put your relationship with Christ first, and the vocational stuff will follow. But I would say have the mindset, and this is what we tell our students, that if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're in full-time ministry. Yeah. No matter what, whether you're in business, government, education, media, you're in full-time ministry. Every day is an opportunity to share the gospel and to make disciples. And so we try to send our students out with that mindset into the world, and having a transformative effect.
Okay. Last question for you.
Okay.
Personal one. For yourself, when your work on earth is done, what do you hope your personal ripple effect will look like?
I hope, not just in my vocational work, but in my family, which we didn't talk about. I have an amazing wife, and we had 8 children, and we just this week had our 20th grandchild. And so, first of all, that my family and my children and my grandchildren would see that I am who I said I was, and that their lives would be affected by what they saw God do in and through me, that my faith was genuine, that though I was flawed, I really sought to honor God in everything that I did. And then similarly, like I said, I want to be here for the next Great Awakening, and I think it's going to happen with young people. I hope my children and grandchildren are a part of it, but I hope the graduates of Arizona Christian University, the people who've been affected by the work of the Center for Arizona Policy over 30 years, that all of it leads back toward advancing the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven, and that we see a country and a world in which human flourishing by following God's design for life will become central again to our culture. That's what I'd like to see.
Love it.
Yeah.
Len, thanks for being here today. Thanks
Thank
for what
you,
you're
Mark.
doing at ACU, and thanks for letting us be a part of it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.